My name is Chris from ChristopherHole.com. Welcome to today's podcast, where we're going to be discussing the subject of HIIT, which is high intensity interval training. I talk about this a lot, or I get asked about HIIT a lot. It's something that certainly at the moment in the industry is becoming very popular, but what I do find is a lot of people are going into it without necessarily all of the best information. It's at the moment, I believe, being hyped up as the way to exercise, and a lot of people are doing it without necessarily understanding the benefits, the drawbacks, sort of what it is, and it's becoming a little bit misunderstood as a way of getting, or a way of getting at least a part of your physiology fit, if you will. So before we get into talking about that, I just want to mention my social channels. You can go to Facebook, Christopher Hole Training, or you can go to Twitter or Instagram, which is at Christopher Hole. Just like and follow on there. It'd be great to have you along, answer any questions that you may have. And alternatively, you can go to the website, which is christopherhole.com/join. You can join the monthly newsletter, where we feature videos, podcasts like this, which you can explore and obviously get more information from. So, back to today's podcast, where we're talking about HIIT. So first of all, what is it? Well, it's a series of repeated bouts of high-intensity exercise, alternated with periods of rest. So when you hear a trainer saying it's 20 seconds and 30 seconds, it's 10 seconds and 20 seconds, it's 40 seconds and 20 seconds, if they're saying it's just that, they're missing the wider picture of what HIIT is. HIIT is essentially, it's interval training. It doesn't matter what the interval is, it's just done at a high intensity. So that's kind of, I guess, the first part of it, is understanding it's just interval training done at a high intensity. Yes, there are certain studies that have shown that certain timings have got certain benefits, and that's what we, I guess, is the next part, is then understanding, does that client need that benefit? Therefore, give them those timings of the training. So it's very much understanding those from the trainer's perspective, and I guess from the public's perspective, so they kind of understand what type of training that they need and that is being prescribed to them, because it's very common for trainers and coaches in the industry just to say, oh, HIIT training, here you go, do this, or do this one, or do this one. And there's not a great deal of thought that goes behind it. But that's where the I guess the individuality comes with regards to the HIIT training that needs to be done. Now, where did it come from? Well, it's been used for a very long time. It was used since I guess sort of like the 1930s, but it started picking up in the 1950s and 60s, and that's where it started becoming. It started spreading out and it started changing timings. But basically, it came from a German sort of athletic track coach called Dr. Gerschler. I think that's the right name. He'd been using it since the 1930s, and then he teamed up with a Dr. Reindel, which is he's a cardiologist, and that's where they came up with the original sort of high intensity training. And then what started to happen from there is other coaches started to get their hands on it, and then they just started giving it their own timings. Because the Gerschler and Reindel, what they were doing is they were using the individual's heart rate. So they'd say, we do the work until they hit 180, and then we'd rest them until they got to 120. So they were using individual timings for each person that they were using it with. After that, it just started turning into 40 seconds and 20 seconds, 10 seconds and 20 seconds, 1 minute and 20 seconds. It wasn't sort of an individual timings around it. It was just sort of standardized and fixed timings that everyone would use, which in some respects is useful, but in other respects it's not so useful. So again, it's very much, it's understanding that, and if you want to just jump in and do it, then fine, do it. But if you want to understand a little bit more behind it, understand what different timings do to your physiology, and then use the necessary one for the outcome that you want, if that makes sense. So what we then come on to are some of the benefits of it. Now, I don't have time to go into the exact details of what timings get what benefits, but if we just list some of the benefits, basically it's an anaerobic or aerobic benefit. So that's without oxygen and with oxygen. So that has benefits on the cardiovascular fitness of someone. It benefits blood pressure, it benefits insulin sensitivity, it benefits the mobilization of fat, or what's known as fat oxidation, and it also helps with cholesterol profiles. So from a metabolic perspective, it's very good. What we then come on to are some of the drawbacks, and this is where we sort of change into what I describe as the mechanical aspects. Now, again, what we have to understand is where HIIT training or HIIT came from. It came from athletes. Gershler and Reindel, they were working with professional, or at least high level athletes. Then the coaches that started designing the standard sort of models of interval training, they were also working with athletes. So from a mechanical perspective, they would have been in a much more advantageous position. What's happened recently is it's been filtered down into the general public who don't necessarily have a great mechanical foundation. So their posture might not be great. Their joint integrity might not be great. They might have unstable joints, ankles, hips, backs, things like that. And what we're then doing is we're then putting increased load on unstable joints, which is then only going to diminish the foundation of integrity that joint has, if that makes sense. So first of all, they can be high impact, and what that means is what it started out as, it was just 40 seconds and 20 seconds, for example. It didn't really matter what the exercise was, because it was used in running, it was used in swimming, it was used in cycling, it was used in all sorts of realms of exercise, or realms of athleticism and fitness, and the exercise didn't really take into account. But what they're doing now is they're bringing in sort of high impact exercises, squat jumps, high knees, burpees, and all these different types of exercises that are putting increased stress on potentially fragile or unstable joints. So they can create higher impact, which in turn makes a joint more vulnerable to injury if it's unstable. And what this is doing, this is, I guess, like another drawback, is it's increasing the stress on joints and tissues, which is kind of as I've described. So they've got compromised tissues and compromised joints already, or unstable joints and tissues already. And what we're doing is we're putting unnecessary load on that. So from the general public's perspective, they need to be coached into it, rather than it's just a HIIT class and they're just told to do it, if that makes sense. So it's very much making sure that the exercises that are being chosen don't put unnecessary stress. So you put very simple exercises into a HIIT class, if you will. You're not putting very complex, high intensity or high impact exercises into that. So you've got to make sure that the integrity of the individual doing it, or the integrity of their joints and tissues, is sufficient before they go into it. So what we're doing, I guess, in conclusion, where I'm sort of taking this, is HIIT, or high intensity interval training, is very good for the right person at the right time. So that's someone with a good foundation of fitness, so metabolic fitness, if you will, but also mechanical fitness. Postures are good, technique is good, joint stability is good. So what we've got to do is, once we can sort of tick that off for that person, then we can send them into a HIIT class, if you will. And it's very bad for the wrong person at the wrong time, which are, let's just say, very unfit people. So they might be sort of extremely overweight. You might start them at a moderate interval training and then build them into high intensity training. So it's very much from the trainer's perspective, it's giving the right training to the right person, and from the public's perspective, knowing that you have to have the right training at the right time. So when you put those two together, you've got the right trainer with the right person in the public doing the right training, then you'll be able to develop the fitness. And if you want to develop up to high intensity training, then you coach them to that. You build the integrity of the joints before you go into the high intensity training, if that makes sense. So hopefully you can start to sort of understand the point that I'm getting to, which is essentially, do HIIT, high intensity interval training, for the right people at the right time. Don't just throw any person into it and expect them to get all the benefits from it, because what they can do, if they've got bad ankles, bad knees, bad hips, bad shoulders, is that could just become exacerbated and become, in a sense, worse. So hopefully that's been helpful. Hopefully it's given you a little bit more insight into HIIT training. Hopefully it's given you a little bit more context of what happens around HIIT training, so you're able to select better exercise, better workouts for yourself or the people that you're coaching if you're a trainer. So many thanks for listening. I'll speak to you in a future podcast.